Did you ever hear about the time an elephant walked across the River Thames in London? Or when there was a printing press on the river? No, really. It was during these very cold winters. The entire river was frozen solid, and people built a whole city on the ice. This is the story of the London Frost Fairs, which is one of my favorites. So, this is the River Thames in January 1684. And look at it, it's all white. It's actually frozen. There are 4 feet of solid ice, and you can see there are people walking on top of it. This is the River Thames, the huge river that flows across London. People would use that river for transportation. There were 20,000 watermen working on the river full time. They would deliver coal, they would move food, ferry people across. Everything moved across this river to keep the city going. But then, on the 20th of December, just before Christmas, the river froze. What? And it stayed frozen for 2 whole months. In this photo here, you can see the ice, and you can see there's people walking across it, little tents and things they've built, and I guess people just made the most of it. Overnight, there were about 20,000 watermen that were suddenly unemployed. Food could not reach the markets, coal could not be delivered. And remember, this was during the coldest winter that anyone had ever seen. King Charles II had to organize an emergency charity. He donated £2,000, which in 1863, if you do the conversion, it's about £600,000 today in 2026, or over $1 million American dollars. But people were starving. They were freezing to death, and the ground was so solid, they couldn't even bury their dead. So what did the Londoners do? When the Thames was frozen, they built a city on top of the ice. It started with a few food stalls, but by the 9th of January, about 2 weeks after this started, there was a full-on frost fair on the river. There were streets that were full of shops on the ice. There were merchants selling their goods. There were makeshift taverns. Booksellers sold their books on the ice, and they even walked an elephant across the ice, which is my favorite part of the story, because why not? I guess it shows how thick the ice was that it could hold an elephant. And then someone brought a printing press on the ice, an actual printing press, and you could go there and you could get a souvenir. The souvenir had your name and the date printed right there, and it said, "Printed on the Thames." There was a printer called George Croom who was making £5 a day, which is about £1,500 a day in today's money, or just over 2,000 US dollars. It was 10 times what an average laborer would earn in a week in that time. And King Charles II actually came down himself and bought one of these souvenirs. The King of England came onto the River Thames. There are historical records of this purchase, but it gets better. They roasted an entire ox on the river, and if you think the heat of the roasting the ox still did not melt the ice. And in, I think, early February, the king and queen came to eat some of this oxen on the ice. Multiple sources say there were football games, a 9-pin bowling alley, and puppet shows on the ice. There were even 40 hackney coaches, the taxis of the day, driving across it like it was a street. On the 26th of January, 1684, Captain Edwards marched his entire company across the river. It was a drill and a display of strength. Someone got married on the ice. People were holding business meetings on what a few weeks ago was the River Thames. And Chipperfield Circus, which still operates today, actually started as entertainment on this Frost Fair, with James Chipperfield exhibiting his performing animals at the Frost Fair in 1684. But by early February, the weather changed. In the morning of the 5th of February, the hackney coaches were still driving across the river. But by early afternoon, there were boats rowing through the river, and by the next day, the frost was actually gone. The weather was warming up. This entire city that was built on the ice vanished overnight. But that was not the only frost fair that London ever saw. The frost fair returned again in 1716, 1739, and 1789. And the last one was in 1814. This was the one with the elephant. But in 1814, the freeze only lasted 4 days. And after 1814, the River Thames actually never froze again. The weather was warming up. That period from I think the 1400s until 1814 was called the Little Ice Age. It was a little bit colder back then. And also, London changed the river itself. In 1831, they demolished the old London Bridge, which had 19 narrow arches that slowed the river's flow. This could flow faster after this redesign. They replaced it with just 5 wide arches, which it has today, meaning that the Thames River could flow faster. And then they also dredged it deeper throughout the 1800s, which improved the flow. A river that is deeper and faster doesn't freeze as easily. Some of the souvenir cards from the Frost Fair survived. They were made on that printing press. Physical proof that the river actually froze for 2 months solid. You can see them in the British Museum today. And now the Thames may never freeze like that again, but at least we have the story. If you like this video, give it a follow and a like. And let me know in the comments what you thought about the London Frost Fair and what would you like to hear about in future videos.